Thank you for visiting Past the Wire TV, the YouTube channel of PastTheWire.com.
You have to run to stay in front. Welcome.
Unfiltered on Past the Wire TV.
Here with some exciting news. DRF Formulator, the gold standard in past performance information, is now free exclusively on DRF Bets. Join DRF Bets with the promo code WINNING. Get a $250 first deposit match bonus, a $10 free bet, and free Formulator already uploaded to your account. Access Formulator's premium features, including sortable trainer stats, race replays, personalized trip notes, and lots more. Free Formulator exclusively on DRF Bets.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Unfiltered on Past the Wire TV. Michael Wilson, myself, John Stettin, are ready to talk pilots and passengers, critiquing some jockeys in hopefully a constructive way. You know, a lot of people come back with that, well, you've never really rode a racehorse. What do you know? I get that, but you know, people talk about athletes. Jockeys are athletes. I think fair criticism is okay. I don't think, you know, cheap shots or hitting below the belt is appropriate, but we're going to break them down into two categories, right?
Yeah, no, I think this is going to be something that's ongoing. So if you've got riders that you like and you want us to address what we think of them in terms of if they make the pilots list or if they make the passengers list, feel free to send, you know, messages either to John or myself, and we'll include it on the next segment when we do it. But this one we decided to tackle, try and make it a little bit easier. And we said, you know, heck, let's go through the 20 riders in the starting gate of the Derby and give you guys a little bit more of a flavor of what these jocks really are. How good are they? What are they good at? What are some of their strong suits? What are they weak at? And how maybe a horseman looks at fitting jock to horse. And then also from a handicapper, what he's probably looking at in terms of who's riding certain horses and how they're moving up in situations. So I think it's going to be fun. And, you know, if you guys take offense, you're welcome to see me at Saratoga and tell me to my face that you belong on the pilots list.
Right. And I'm going to add to that if you're on the passengers list, you know, use it as a little motivating factor, you know, because you don't have to be there for life. You can work yourself off the passengers list onto the pilots list, and you can also work yourself off the pilots list onto the passengers list. Now, I decided, because we're gonna start with the Derby, okay? Top riders get calls in the Derby, okay? So obviously you're going to probably have a lot more pilots than passengers, and I think we're going to agree on a majority of them. But I decided for this show, okay, I'm a big believer in jockeys. I'm not one of those guys that says, you know, oh, the rider doesn't matter. You put anybody on the best horse, they're going to win. I believe the riders make a big difference. Okay. What I'm going to start by saying is I'm going to go hard. That's number one. Okay. Because of the list that we're starting with, nobody's getting any slack. All right. That's number one. Number two, there's a big difference between a bad ride and a bad trip. Okay. A bad ride falls back, in my opinion, on the rider doing something wrong or not doing something right or not giving his horse by reason of mistake, miscalculation, something he did wrong and contributed to not giving the horse the best chance to win. A bad trip, to me, is outside the rider's control. You get sawed off, you get shut in, you get boxed out, you get a million and one different things can happen that can cause a bad trip. So there are differences, in my opinion. Agree? Bad trip and bad ride.
Oh, absolutely. You know, some of it comes down to, you know, and this is where this can get a little bit fun. There are riders I would leg up that I'm like, I would be praying, don't make a mistake, because I know that the odds were that they would make a mistake. And there's other riders where you'd leg them up, you know, ice cold in your veins. You're not worried. If something happens in a race, they're able to make a move and figure it out on their own. So yes, bad trips are usually situations that they can't, you know, they can't anticipate, but they can only react to it. And when you have a pilot, you can react properly when you have turbulence. So
I agree. Now, again, to keep things fair, you know, you're friends with a lot of riders. I'm friends with some riders. I write articles. You think my article stinks? People say it on Twitter all the time. You know what I mean? On social media, hey, that article stunk, or that one was great. You think the show, you know, you gotta have a thick skin in this game. So don't take it personal. It's all, I don't want to say in fun. It's opinion, but it's constructive and hopefully beneficial. So we're gonna start with the Derby guys. I guess we should start with the winner, right? Rich Strike, Sonny Leon.
yeah, no, I think it's a good place to start. You want to hop on and tell me what you think?
I think he rode a great race in the Kentucky Derby, but I think it was more the result of a perfect storm kind of falling into his lap. I was not very familiar with him. I watched a lot of his rides in preparation for this show. I'm going to call him a passenger. Even though in the Derby, he was probably a little bit more of a pilot, but like I said, a lot had to do with the trip and how things played out for him. And a lot of the rides I noticed that he gives that are good out of town are, you know, on heavy favorites. When you're the leading rider and you're riding a lot of 3 to 5 shots, it's very easy to look good. I mean, I'll go back to an example, Ramon Dominguez, who a lot of people loved as a rider. Okay. I thought he was a good rider, but I always thought he was overrated. And I'll tell you why. You know, he dominated Aqueduct in the winter when a lot of guys weren't there, and rode just about 70 or 80% of his mounts were odds on favorites. Okay. You're going to win a lot of races, and you're going to get in trouble and get out of trouble on a lot of those horses because, you know, it's just that way. So I think Sonny is a guy that has ability. He can ride, but to me, the definition that separates a pilot from a passenger is a guy that's going to win when he's not on the best horse consistently, or put not the best horse in position to win consistently. And I don't see that from Sonny Leon at this point in his career.
Yeah, no, I think I can agree with you on that. What I saw, because I watched his tapes and I started looking at him and, you know, watching him ride at Belterra and some of these different races and trying to figure out what type of rider that he was. And I think he's very good at knowing what he has underneath him. He's got a very strong finish for a rider. He is ugly. He's not the prettiest rider. You see a lot of these really polished guys, they look very good on a horse. He doesn't have the prettiest seat on a horse. He kind of arches his back a little bit. He's not perfectly aerodynamic. I think he has room for improvement. I would call him a pilot at a small track, but there's not a whole lot of competition that he's competing against. But I only think he's been riding, at least in the US, what, 5-6 years thus far? So when you ride, and a lot of people might not understand this, when you ride cheap horses, you learn how to ride a little bit more than when you're handed, Mercedes or Lamborghinis and you drive them. So I think he's in a learning curve where if you give him better mounts and you give him some better shots at bigger tracks, and he learns some of the fine tuning, and this is another thing that you might not think of, right? So when you're talking a different sport like the Golden State Warriors, right? They're beat the Celtics last night, and their team is mainly made up of guys in their system. Well, their system includes Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, and Draymond Green. Same thing when you're in a jocks room with great jocks. You learn from the other guys around you, and you can understand by watching other people what you need to do to improve. I don't think he's in a situation where it's going to allow him to do that. He might have to take a move to a bigger track and take a hit financially, but I think the guy's got enough talent. He's just very unpolished and raw still.
I agree with that. I think he does have talent, and I think he does have a lot of room to improve. And I'm glad you brought that out. That's a good point, because if you're riding in a room where, you're the top guy, what are you really going to learn? You know what I mean? Like you said, but if you move to a bigger circuit, if he did, yeah, it's going to be tougher to get business and get those calls. And when you're used to being the leading rider or riding the whole card, it's tough to take that step back. But when you want to, take a shot at the big time, you got to do it. Small fish in a big pond, or big fish in a small pond is a, personal choice. So I think we're on the same page for the most part with Sonny. Moving down the line, Epicenter. I think this guy, Joel Rosario, second finisher, is going to be a no-brainer. I think you've got to call him a pilot. People do critique him quite a bit for a rider of his stature and with his resume. People have a tendency to say he likes to drop too far back and come too wide, and rides every horse the same way. I don't see it that way. I think Joel is excellent, and I think absolute pilot, puts all his horses or most of his horses in a position to win. He gets a little streaky and does sometimes come wide, but he's a strong finisher and makes up for it and puts his horses in position to win. And I think where he gets a little bit misdiagnosed is, I actually think, and I'm sure I'm in the minority, or pretty sure, I think he is a fantastic rider when he's on the lead and decides to go. He's got a nice loose rein on a horse that gets speed horses to relax. He's always got that little extra something. Kind of reminds me of how Pat Day used to ride speed horses way back when it was always a little bit more gas in the tank. And he's a really strong finisher. I think he's one of the top 3 strongest finishers in the country. So 100% pilot, despite that little tendency that people point out and jump on of him liking to go a little bit wide and come from far back.
Well, and I think I would agree. I think Joel's a pilot. I remember when he showed up in California when he was young, and we were both very young. I was at Doug O'Neill's barn as an assistant trainer, and Joel was just kind of getting his career going in California, and you could tell he had talent then. What I've seen with Joel, definitely a pilot in my book, as you said, and it's something that people undervalue with him on a speed horse. He does know how to get him to kind of switch off and fall into that natural rhythm. And he's such a strong finisher that you've got to be careful that you don't come up short, knowing that he's going to have a little bit more to finish with on his horse. The one thing, and yes, some people might critique that he goes wide, but what I've seen at times in California, he'd go rail and he'd get stuck and he wouldn't be able to get out. And so it could maybe because he's had that happen to him enough times that maybe the safer routes just to make sure your horse gets a clean run. can that compromise you at times? But I will tell you as a trainer, I would much rather you, and I told riders this all the time. I used to train my horses to be fit enough that we had a full tank of gas left at the quarter pole. And I said, if you've got to lose a couple steps to go wide, but to make sure we've got a clean trip, do it. Don't get fancy. Don't go rail. Don't try and get stopped. Because if I get beat because you made a judgment error versus if you went wide and we won, I'm fine with that. So personally, as a trainer, I'd rather you give the horse a clean trip than stopping momentum. I think, and these are two guys we're going to touch on, the first and second place finishers in the Belmont. I think Ness got stopped a little bit in the Belmont and had to shift out. And that break in momentum cost her a lot of ground, specifically, versus if she stayed where she was and she got up there rail clean and didn't have to stop, it might have been much closer between her and Mo Donegal. So sometimes it's easier to keep a horse's, especially on dirt, it's very easy to keep a horse's momentum and finish strong than to have to stop and start over again.
No argument. I think that
The
was
pilot.
Yeah, that was an easy one. Next one's probably going to be easy too, because he's everybody's favorite son right now, and that's Flavien Prat, who ran third with Zandon. Before Prat broke his back, it's interesting because they're two French riders, and we're going to talk about both of them. I think we're going to talk about three, but Prat, before he broke his back, I wrote in one of my columns that I thought he was the most improved rider in the United States at that point. And that, he had that setback and he came back better than ever. Okay. And has just taken it to the next level, to the next level, to the next level. And now he's looking to take it to the next level by moving his tack to New York. I wrote the same thing about Florent Geroux years ago, the year before he won, I think, his first Breeders' Cup on that Midwest Roger Brueggemann horse, Work All Week or whatever. I forget the horse's name, but it was a Midwest thoroughbred horse that I think a Roger Brueggemann horse that won the Breeders' Cup Sprint. And I had said the same thing about him. So I was a Prat fan pretty early on and recognized his ability. I think he's clearly a pilot. He puts his horses in position to win. I think he is good on the front. I think he's good closing. I think he's a stronger finisher than people give him credit for. I think he gets down low and really can ride and finish and go head and head aggressively when he has to. And he doesn't really have right now many vulnerabilities in the saddle. I'm not going to call him elite at this point, even though everybody else will, and I'll tell you why. I watch races really closely, and he does make mistakes or miscalculations a little bit more often than I like to see to call somebody elite. For example, in the turf race on Belmont Day, on a horse named Adamo, I think he was a little too patient. I think he had a lot of horse, and he waited a little bit too long to really find a way out. Now, there was some traffic, and he was forced to wait a little bit, but I think he was forced to wait because he was a little bit too patient and didn't go a little bit sooner. And I think that's a danger that good riders, when they're in the groove and getting a lot of the top horses, can have a tendency to fall into being overconfident and sometimes a little too patient and a little bit too complacent because you're used to winning and you're used to riding a lot of those, like you said, Mercedes and Porsches and Cadillacs, and those horses overcome things, and I think when you really hit that elite top 3 or 4 in the country or the world status, you never make those mistakes. You know what I mean? If you lose, it's because you didn't have the horse, not because you miscalculated when to move or something like that. He's almost there, and he's definitely a pilot, but I'm not going to give him the elite title just yet.
So I would agree. I think he's a pilot. I remember when I went to California, everybody was telling me, oh, this Prat guy, nobody can ride like this Prat guy. And I taken some time off. I'd been out of the game for 4 or 5 years. Enjoyed my time in Colorado. But as I got back in, starting to learn riders, and what I noticed with him, and Rispoli was a bit the same, but Prat had it in a different aspect, was it's almost like he'd hit a nitro button. Like these horses would just explode underneath him, and he could really get a horse to finish. And so understanding that he knew he had that much horse underneath him and could get that type of run out of a horse to fly to the wire was extremely impressive to me. And both of them, and we're not going to talk about Rispoli on this show, but both of them still have that European style where they can ride. It's not as visible of hands and heels, but they're really riding like a European rider where they're using their entire body to get that horse to go forward. So I agree with you. He's gotten, nailed a couple times because he might have thought he had more underneath him and a little bit more zoom than the horse gave. And so I think as he gets more experienced, and there's a rider on this list that we're going to talk about later that does not make mistakes in my book that often. And I agree, he has a little bit further to go to crack into the top 4, to kind of be in that category where you're rarely making a wrong move. You're pretty much right every single time. And look, every athlete makes a mistake, right? So nobody's going to be 100% fail proof, but it's judging it enough to where it's like, you timed it and you got there by the head versus losing by the nose. And he's
Right.
not quite there on every horse yet.
Agree. I think that's going to be an unpopular opinion. A lot of people are going to say we're nuts, but we're in agreement. So is what it is. Jose Ortiz.
Jose's, I mean, I've loved watching how Jose's developed over the years. Again, when I was training in New York, Jose and Irad were brand new on the scene. And you could just tell that they were phenomenal horsemen from the get-go. Why don't you want to go about and tell me your thoughts on him first, or you want me to continue on?
Go ahead, you continue on this one.
So I think Jose, when he showed up to the US, showed this proclivity for, and it's still something he's, in my book, one of the best in the country at, but he was extremely good at stealing races off the lead, of just putting a horse in the lead, getting it to fall asleep, thinking everybody else didn't realize how much horse he had left and just draw off and draw clear. Irad, when they both came, Irad was more of the patient finisher. Jose was very much extremely good on a speed horse. Now, watching these guys progress over this time, Jose, I don't think has too many flaws in his game, but I still think, as we talked about with Joel, being able to be on a speed horse and finish, Jose can steal a race off the lead as good as anybody. And it's something that if I have a speed horse and I can get Jose Ortiz and just put him on the front and see if you can catch him, I'd prefer him over anybody else. But I think he's a strong finisher. I think he's a great judge of pace. I think he knows when to make the right moves. What type of race will fit this horse well. I think he does his homework. I don't think he's got too many flaws.
I agree with everything you said. Everything across the board. Absolutely a pilot, one of the best in the country, no question about it. Great rider. I've got one minor criticism to Jose Ortiz. I don't think he's the same rider in every race. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. I don't think he rides $25,000 claimers, non-winners of 2 lifetime on Wednesday afternoon at Belmont Park the same way he rides the Peter Pan or the Belmont Stakes. I think that he's got 2 game faces. One is good because he's good every day, day in and day out. And one is phenomenal. And you get the phenomenal one on the big days in the big races. And I can see a different Jose Ortiz from that first scenario to the second scenario. I think if he ever, for whatever reason, decides to be just that graded stake rider that he can be on a day in and day out basis, then he's one of the top 2 or 3 in the country year round, and is one of those guys that can potentially dominate the game like riders we've seen do over time. Definitely has that ability, but I don't know that he has the desire to be that guy, because to do that, I remember when Angel Cordero did it and wanted to be the dominating guy. Okay, he was the leading rider in New York, and he wanted to win the money title so bad to get the Eclipse Award that what would he do? He would go and ride $10,000 claimers at night at the Meadowlands and be riding them like it was the Kentucky Derby, you know, because he just wanted those wins. And you'd watch him ride, and you'd watch him ride that $10,000 claimer at, you know, Thursday night at the Meadowlands, and he'd ride no different, you know, Saturday in the grade 1 at Belmont or Aqueduct. And he was down fighting for every inch. And that's where I see Jose can improve.
No, I would agree with you in that regard. I think, you know, with anything, when you're a trainer, you have to understand a rider's mentality of what you're bringing to him on race day and what type of horse you're going to have to give a certain rider to make sure you get their best ride out of them. There were certain guys, I actually know a certain story. I trained a horse that was moved to me from Jason Service, a horse called Don Dolce. And Don Dolce was just this hard-knocking gelding in New York. And Don Dolce, Jason had claimed him for $80,000. Ran him in, I think, the Salvatore Mile on a couple different spots, and the horse just wouldn't show up, couldn't win. I had started training for Barry Schwartz, and Barry said, Mike, you know, I'm going to send you this horse, and got the horse in the barn. Instantly realized what was the issue, and what they were doing wrong with him was, we got him fitter, we got him a little bit stronger behind, using himself a little bit better, but he was a grinder. And this was a horse that just wanted to grind out a finish. He didn't want to explode. He didn't have enough early pace that you could put him on the lead. And so Barry called me and he says, I want Jose Ortiz on him. And I said, look, Barry, I have no issue with Jose. I've ridden him on other horses. He's won for me. Love the guy, not for this horse. And Barry said, well, why not for this horse? I want Jose. And I said, he doesn't fit him. I said, this horse is a horse that you've got to get down and start riding him at the 3/8 pole and just keep, I said, you're not hitting him, you're hand riding him. You're trying to keep him going at a pace where he'll get there at the wire. I said, Jose doesn't fit him. I said, who does fit him is Ruben Silvera. And Barry says, who the heck is Ruben Silvera? And I said, look, you don't know him.
Barry should know who Ruben Silvera is.
I said,
head of Naira.
So I said, look, Ruben's come up from Parks for the winter at Aqueduct. He rides really well. He's going to fit this type of horse on this day. And that's who I want on the horse. And Barry says, do whatever you want, put him on. Horse won. Okay, the horse won, and he was claimed. We ran him in the 2 other then for the 62.5 tag, and he won by a head. And he only won by a head because he had a rider that understood how to ride a horse that needs to grind out a finish. And the horse won and went onward. So, talking from trainer perspective, you have to know what type of horse you have and what you're going to give the rider. If you give him the wrong horse and it misfires, you can't always blame the jock. Okay, if I always knew what I would give Jose, or what I give Irad, or what I give Johnny, and what I wouldn't give the 3 of them. And you just have to have that understanding when you take your horses over there.
I agree. Next guy on our list, young guy. Got a little bit of a following too. Raylu Gutierrez. Popular guy, believe it or not. Young guy. I think you can say up and coming. Maybe. I don't know what you feel about him, but I'm going to call him at this point a passenger. I think he's got a lot to learn. I think he gets some live mounts and gets him home, but I don't consider him the kind of rider at this point in his career that puts every horse in the best position to win. I think he can finish. I think he's aggressive. I think he's got a future if he keeps his head on straight. Which can be a problem with young riders, but at this point, I think he's a passenger with potential.
I agree. I think I watch a lot of races because I have to find horses to claim for clients and different things. And so what drives me nuts is watching fairgrounds and hearing this Raylu rally, the Raylu rally over and over and over.
I told you, I know he's got a following.
Yeah. And so I think Raylu Gutierrez is a very good rider. I think he has potential to move into the pilot status. To me, he's still a passenger. And the reason why is he stays busy on a horse. So he is trying. It's not like he doesn't try on horses. He stays busy and gives them a shot if they're going to fire. But I don't think he fully knows how to get them to fire if that fire is not already lit. And so he makes some errors on judging pace and timing his run. And I think that costs him at times. So to me, he's a passenger with potential. Again, as John said, when you're young and you start becoming successful, when that success starts dwindling because you start riding against better riders, you have to figure out how to continue to up your game. So he's got room. You know, he's maybe a guy coming off the bench in the NBA All-Star game. Could he be a starter one day? Probably, but he's got some things to work on.
Agree. I'm curious on your take on this next rider, Ricardo Santana Jr.
I think Ricardo, again, you have to look at who supports him. Asmussen supports him really well. And Asmussen,
not anymore. He was for a long time, but now they were on the outs for a while, and now they're kind of, I think, in the courtship stage once again. They went like backwards instead of forwards.
Right. So, I mean, it's when I look at him, I think he has a very good read on how a horse responds to different cues. He tends to change it up. Like he'll throw a cross at a horse, see how they go. He'll show him the whip. He might hit him once. I noticed that in the stretch, he uses a lot of different cues to try and get the horse to continue its momentum. He changes it up pretty often to try and help them stay focused on the job at hand, which is to finish the race. He's cusp. I'd almost call him co-pilot. I wouldn't call him passenger fully, and I wouldn't call him pilot fully. I think he's got enough talent where on the right horses, but he doesn't have that elite like some of these other guys. It would be my opinion.
Okay. I could see that, and I've spoken to other people about him that kind of echo your sentiment and disagree with me. I call him a pilot. I actually think he's a little bit underrated. I like what you pointed out, that he does throw different cues at horses and does throw crosses and change it up and do whatever he can to get the most out of a horse. And I think anything that he lacks, he makes up for with that effort and with that awareness of not only his horse, but the horses around him. I'll notice if he sees, if he, takes the lead and is going really well and sees a horse coming, he'll do that. He'll shake his horse up even more, you know what I mean? Because he knows somebody's coming, where a lot of other guys might just think their horse is already in full flight. He kind of sees trouble coming or somebody coming at him before it might be so evident, and will try and get the jump on that. I think he's really, really good. I think he's a very strong finisher. I think he's an aggressive rider. I think he makes the right moves, the right kind of judgments of pace. And my book, he's a pilot. His career took a hit when he stopped riding everything for Asmussen. So he's going to have to prove it to a lot of other people if he doesn't get back into that barn. But I think he made the most of those opportunities. And again, I've got him on the pilot list.
Yeah. So, I mean, I would agree with what you're saying in a lot of those regards. I think when I watched him in certain races, there would just be minor things, nothing major though. And I don't want it to sound, because I have trouble keeping every rider in my brain, right? So as I mentioned to John, my job is to watch horses, right? So I'm watching how horses respond in races. I'm not always watching the guy on their back. And I'm trying to figure out, when I'm trying to figure out how to purchase a horse for a client or claim a horse for a client, is that horse competitive? What does that horse want to do? And is it any good? Whatever the rider is doing is necessarily irrelevant, because I'm going to try and figure out who's going to ride the horse anyways afterwards. So I've made copious notes on each of these guys. I've rewatched tape knowing what I basically know. So when I say a guy stays busy and throws a lot of cues, that's a good thing. If you can only hand ride and hit a horse, you don't have a diverse skill set. when you can hand ride a horse home, or you can just throw across and realize, hey, you know what? He keeps responding to this. I'm going to have him keep going like this because every time I hit him, he stops. That is a big tool belt. So I think he's got a very good tool belt, and I think he is a good rider. I had co-pilot, pilot, so I'll hang there. You'll say 100% pilot. I'm good with that.
Okay. Next guy is a veteran, Corey Lanerie.
Corey Lanerie.
Corey Lanerie wins a lot of races at Churchill Downs. Gonna take a lot of flack if you don't put him on the pilot list. Where you got him?
Yeah, I mean, I think at a certain stage with a lot of these guys, so I'll be honest, I don't think the jockey colony in Kentucky is phenomenal. I think it's good. I think it's got a good colony. I think you've got a couple good riders on the circuit. You've got a couple great riders and a couple good ones filling spots. So dominating the Kentucky circuit to me is okay. It's not, it's like playing for you play in a new NBA franchise team where you're good, you're in the NBA, but you're not on the elite level. So is he a good rider? I think he's a good rider. My thoughts on him more or less are he has a lot of experience, which can go either way for you when you're riding a horse. It helps you in certain situations not make mistakes, but I don't think he necessarily improves a horse, which is where, to me, I might look at pilot and passenger a little bit different. If I put a jock on a horse that I think is a pilot, that rider's going to improve that horse. If I just put a guy on the horse and it's, well, I know the horse is going to perform, I'm not too worried, and I just need to have a guy that's not going to make a mistake and get me beat, that to me is semi-passenger list. So it might be a little bit different how I look at it than John. I would put Corey.
I'm on the same page with that.
I would put Corey more on the passenger list. I think you put him on a horse, he's not going to make a mistake. He's not going to make too many mistakes, but he's not necessarily going to move a horse up, in my opinion.
I'm with you across the board. I've got him on the passenger list. I think he's a good rider. I don't think he moves a horse up, like you said. I think he's competent to get a horse home, but I think there's a significant mark off in his riding ability when he moves to bigger circuits. And I could use Saratoga as an example. He struggles when he goes there. And even when he gets live mounts, sometimes it's hard for him to get live mounts, as it is for everybody, almost everybody at Saratoga. But when he does, he still has a little bit more of a difficult time getting some of them home than he does at Churchill Downs. And that, combined with what you said, makes me, call him good rider. You know what I mean? He's a pro, but he's a passenger. He's not, a pilot in my book. Next guy, interesting guy, Brian Hernandez Jr. Curious your take on Brian.
Brian, for me, would fall in the same category. I think he's a passenger. I think he's gotten some very good horses that he's partnered up with over the years. I mean, the job he did with Fort Larned was great. But again, he's a guy that you're going to put on a horse because, I mean, what I wrote was, can steer a horse around a track well, good rider, but not quite a pilot. So that's kind of how I look at him as. Again, put him on, horse is ready to fire, big race. At worst, we finish off, we finish third, but if I have a horse that can be top three and I can't choose any of the top guys and I just need a guy to get him around there and not make mistakes, I'd put Brian on. I personally, though, if I have a choice, he'd be further on my list.
To cut to the chase, I'm going to call him a passenger.
Yeah.
Okay. But I think he's an underrated passenger, if that kind of makes sense.
Okay.
I think he's capable on occasion of giving a really, really top shelf, flawless ride. Doesn't do it consistently enough for me to say he's a pilot, and rides just enough, just okay to stay on that passenger list. But I do think he's capable when given the right horse on the big stage, even like he proved in the Breeders' Cup Classic with Fort Lawn, and some other horses as well. So he's a passenger, but I'm going to call him an underrated passenger if I'm bringing that across in the right way. I like him. I think he's a good rider. I'm certainly not afraid to bet on him. There are some guys that I'm afraid to bet on, and there's some guys that I won't single in a ticket under any circumstances. If I like their horse, someone's going to single it and they're on it, I got to take a different approach. He's absolutely not one of those guys. Passenger, underrated passenger. So I guess we're in for the most part in agreement. Julian Leparoux.
So I think when Julian came over, Julian was one of the first kind of French riders, at least the wave that started to come, right? He came and he was exciting because he was a European turf rider that came to the States, and he had a ton of success early. He was riding Ramsey horses and he was killing it. Yeah. And I don't think he's necessarily the same rider then as he is now, or the same rider now as he was then.
I agree.
Whether he's as hungry as he used to, or is it this? I think maybe the fact that now we've had some better French riders come over, some better European riders come over, that now he might be, he's not. So to me, he was pilot shifting towards passenger is where I have him on my list. I still think if you put him on the right horse in the right situation on a big day, you can get a great performance out of Julian. Watching him ride most days at Churchill Downs, I think he's very good. Again, kind of like as I described with Ricardo Santana, he'll switch it up down the lane. Like he won't keep throwing the same cue at a horse over and over and see that it's not working. He will stay active enough to keep the horse busy and see what they respond to. And he's a good judge of understanding what that horse responds to. So to me, I have him as co-pilot. That was kind of my bridge between passenger and pilot. He was co-pilot,
Co-pilot. All right. Okay, we got a new category. I was telling a friend of mine about the show before we did it, and I didn't mention it to you yet, but I was like, yeah, we're going to have 3 categories. Michael brought up, pilots and passengers. I'm going to add a third one, anchor. And he was like, you can't do that. I'm like, why not? I mean, if you're an anchor, you can, aspire to be a passenger. He goes, you can't do that. He goes, that's just rude. He goes, you're going to alienate people. He goes, you can't put a nice spin on calling somebody an anchor. That's a jockey. So I scrapped it, and I didn't even mention it to you till now. I said, yeah, you're probably right. We'll stick with pilot and passenger. So I'm going to call Julian a passenger. Okay. He was hot when he first came here for sure. But he never got to that next level in my book. A lot of guys do that. You know what I mean? They don't take that next step that I like to see riders take, I'll just throw a couple of names out there, like Joe Talamo looked to me like he was going to take the next step and didn't. Drayden Van Dyke looked like he was going to take that next step and didn't. Julian Leparoux looked like he would and should take the next step and just didn't, and now he no longer looks like that. He looked, I got to call him a passenger. I do think he has a weakness in his style where he tends to, fall a little far back and wait a little too long. Probably that turf riding background or whatever doesn't always play as well here in the States, but good rider, but passenger.
Yeah. No, I think we're in pretty much agreement there. Is he's very patient, and I think it bites him. And I think he's not as good of a finisher to be that patient as some of these other guys on the list. So when you're looking at a big race and you have an Irad or you have a Rosario, which we've covered, and we're going to cover others that I think are just as patient but have a hell of a better finish, I think you tend to get eaten alive in those types of races because your patience is not paying off.
I agree. Moving down our list, Mike Smith.
Mike Smith. So Mike Smith was an interesting category. So I think Mike Smith for me, I wrote pilot.
Here's the toughest part about Mike Smith. We're talking about Mike Smith today, June 14th, 2022.
Yes,
So
yes. We're not talking previous Mike Smith, Money Mike, one of the best riders out there, phenomenal rider. Mike today, pilot on a private jet is how I'd make sure the tank is full, make sure that it's ready for takeoff, and make sure that you give him a clean run. And I think, I noticed it, and maybe I'm wrong in saying this, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. Ever since Zenyatta, I think he's tried to keep replicating these horses that can fall asleep off the back and make one huge run. And he changed it up. He didn't ride Justify that way, and he doesn't ride a lot of horses that way. But when I went to California and I said, it'd be great to put Mike Smith on a horse. They said, no, don't put Mike on a horse. I said, why don't put Mike on a horse? They're like, unless it's a grade 1 and it's the best horse of the race, otherwise Mike's not showing up that day. So I think, and you've earned it, right? I can't criticize you for that. You've earned it. If I get to a certain status in my career, right? Like, let's say as a trainer, my dream was to eventually have a barn full of graded stakes horses only. I was not going to accept anything that didn't have the caliber to become a graded stakes horse or wasn't a graded stakes horse, because my time wasn't worth spending time on trying to figure out horses that weren't that caliber. So when you get to a certain caliber in your career and you're at a stage where you don't really need to ride, I don't fault him for not being Money Mike on the undercard versus Money Mike in the grade 1 stake.
Okay. All right. I'm going to call Mike a pilot, even today.
Okay.
I think that he's still too good to go into the passenger stage. I think when he shows up to ride, which is not all the time, like you said, he's a little bit selective, and you want to put him on the right horse and the right, but when he shows up, when he gives you that call and his agent says, all right, I'll ride the horse, I think you're getting a pilot. I think he's got enough experience to compensate for anything. I think he'll put his horse in the right spot. I think if the horse has got it, he'll get it. And I'm calling him a pilot, even at this late stage of his career.
So to clarify, he still was on my pilots list. It's just a select list of what horse, give him a fully gassed up. Don't give him a horse that's going to be coming home with the tank on empty. It's got to be full tank.
He probably won't ride that horse for you.
No, exactly. So I think, and we're going to touch on another veteran, and I think the other veteran, and I can't recall the age difference, how much there is one, but I'm much more comfortable with the other veteran on different types of horses than Mike. I think Mike needs a specific type of horse at this point in his career.
Okay. We're getting close to that other veteran. Next, we've got Rafael Bejarano.
So I think Bejarano, again, similar like Leparoux, right? Came over, rode Go Sapper for Frankel, right? He rode Go Sapper?
No, Castellano rode Go
Castellano rode, okay. So Bejarano, what I remember Bejarano was a young, aggressive rider that used to be like, I thought he was phenomenal originally. I think he's tailed off. I think he's more on the passengers list now than pilots list. Does he still have the talent to be put back on the pilots list? I think so. Does he have the drive to do it? I'm not sure, but I think he's a good rider that doesn't necessarily improve a horse, but he can get the job done. He's the type of rider you would give a horse that is ready to fire without needing the help of a pilot.
I agree. I think he's a passenger, and he's kind of funny because he came over and he took the next step and was almost elite for a little while. I mean, he got really, really good. And then I don't know why, just tailed tremendously, in my opinion, just really arced downward significantly and became just a different rider. He always looked a little awkward on a horse. He never really had a strong left hand, and very rarely even goes to the left hand. I never really understood why, but I mean, it takes an awful lot to get him to go left, and it's not, again, not often and not strong and not pretty. But he used to compensate for it, and he doesn't at all at this point. I don't know what happened to him or what caused that significant arc downward. But he's, a passenger. I think he needs absolutely the best horse in order to win.
Yeah.
Now we're going to get, I think, to that other veteran, John Velasquez, another Hall of Famer.
So in my book, I think Johnny's one of the greatest. I think Johnny's still in that category. I think there's some younger riders who might get more live mounts that might put them in a position to show that maybe look better. Again, when I used to ride Johnny, and I love him, right? We had him on the show. He is a friend. I would know what type of horse I needed to bring for Johnny. And I knew I would want to bring him a horse that he could time everything perfectly, but was not going to put him in a position to where basically he's like a fighter pilot. I mean, I've seen him time finishes. Unbelievable. Knowing exactly how much horse he had, knowing exactly where everybody else was in the field, knowing how much homework he had done. There was one race, I'm surprised we won it, but obviously he knew what he had underneath him. I ran a filly in Saratoga, and I see Johnny go outside and split a horse. And then I see the horse on the fence coming through, but it was coming through at a much quicker pace than Johnny was on the outside. And I'm like, I don't know if Johnny's seen this horse. I mean, this thing was behind him, and now it's up the fence and coming up the inside, and this other horse in the middle is blocking him and is a little bit bigger. Johnny saw that horse, took one look, threw one cross. My horse pulled clear by a half length. He knew exactly what was underneath him and when to use it and how to push the button. I think that's what makes him so impeccable. Is I think he is the one rider out there still who knows exactly where the wire is and knows exactly what he's got and when to use it to make sure he gets there.
Agree. 100% pilot. I will say, when we talked about Mike, we talked about the longevity of his career and judging him today. Judging Johnny strictly today, yes, still a pilot. But interestingly, had you asked me this several years ago, I might have had a different answer, because he went through a period, and I want to say it was after his very bad fall at Keeneland, and he was coming back from an injury that, a lot of people noticed it. He just wasn't the same Johnny, for a while. It took him a while to get his confidence back, his fearlessness back, maybe even his drive back, and I think as you get older, it's probably a lot harder to do. It's easy for me to sit here and say that, but there was a time that he just wasn't the same rider. And you can tell when you watched him back then, he was uncomfortable being on the inside. He didn't like it. He was looking to get outside all the time. And I was like, wow, he's just not the same guy after that fall. But he put that in the rear view, and at this stage of his career, he's as good as he ever was. He just went back to being who he was, for the majority of his career. And I think that's really noteworthy, because I think that's, one of those things that define special athletes in any sport. And I think
he's kind of found like the Tom Brady. And that's why I think, and I do remember some of those years where it was, you knew it was still there, right? And it's kind of, and I don't know, maybe it was the split with Angel, right? And going in a different direction with a new agent that might have helped him kind of
maybe
have a breath of fresh air, but you never know. But to see him nowadays, and we had we bought a yearling for a European owner over the summer and introduced him to Johnny V in Saratoga, and Johnny and him hit it off. And I said, look, when you bring horses to the States for the Breeders' Cup, you want Johnny on, and that's who you really need to put on these horses. And luckily, Johnny made himself available for that. And one of those horses was Go Bears Go, who lost by a nose in the juvenile turf sprint. So, that's situations where, when you can come over with a good horse and you can get Johnny on, you're putting yourself, in my opinion, I think he's still, to me, top 4 personally. But again, it's got to be a specific type of horse. I'm not saying that, oh, it's a speed horse or it's a horse that comes off the pace. Don't give him a horse that's going to misfire when it hits the quarter pole, right? When you get at a point in your career, you don't want to ride those horses anymore. And I'm not saying he doesn't, but every rider needs the specific type of horse that fits them. If you give Johnny a horse that's fit, you can't. I think a horse that's fit, that has a shot, I think he gives you the greatest shot to win, period. Personally.
Okay, well, we're going to stay at the upper echelon of riders now and talk about Jose's brother, Irad.
Yeah, so Irad for me they were different when they came over, right? I think you probably saw it, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Very
I mean,
different.
Irad was very much, and I still think we could see it today. You're saying you see a different Jose on, Saturdays than on a Wednesday. I think Irad is aggressive all the time. I think Irad is a rider that pretty much is probably, I know he's competitive because I know him personally as a person, as I've come through racing, but he's a very competitive guy. And he shows that when he rides every race. I think he shows up every time personally. I think he pushes it. Sometimes people say he pushes it a little bit too far.
Right. He gets
But
a lot of criticism for that. Absolutely.
But I think he's a very aggressive guy who knows how to time a finish, who knows how to ride a horse on lead, who knows how to ride a horse from behind, who knows how to stalk the pace. But you're going to get a guy who's going to go in attack mode down the stretch, regardless of whatever type of horse you're on. And I think he's to me right now, I think he's still probably best in the country.
Well, interesting. Obviously, I think he's a pilot for sure. I think he's one of the best riders. I do have a couple of, one is not a critique, maybe it's a compliment. I think that he's become a big race rider to the point where it's noticeable. Okay. Breeders' Cup Day, Derby Day, Belmont Day. If you watch him, you know him better than I do, but I know him a little bit, and I've seen him enough and watched him enough to observe this. He's got an elevated game face on some of those days. I mean, I remember at the Breeders' Cup when he won a couple of years ago in the Classic on Vino Rosso. He won a few races that year, but he just, from the moment he got out of his car and walked into the room, he was just like, it was game day. His game face was on. He was just hungry, competitive, on fire, and you could see it in every movement that he made and all his mannerisms. It was just an elevated Irad. And to me, he just, that's when I realized, and since then I've watched it, and so he's just become a big race, big day rider. I mean, great all the time, but really, really, good on those big days. He does take a lot of criticism, and people call him reckless. I think there's a fine line between reckless and race riding. He pushes that envelope as much as I think he thinks he could. The kind of person he is. He's not looking to hurt anybody, you know what I mean, or drop anybody. Although sometimes people accuse him of that, and I think that's not just. But he's aggressive and he pushes the envelope, and to get to the top and be there, you've got to be aggressive and push that envelope to some degree. So, I understand it, but complete pilot, and has the ability to be one of those dominating guys. Wasn't that lucky at Royal Ascot today on Wesley Ward's horse, didn't get out of the gate well, and I heard the saddle slipped and Golden Pal lost whatever shot he may have had coming out of the gate. But he's a big money rider and a big rider. So yeah, absolutely a pilot. As is the next guy I think we're going to talk about. I've got him in that elite category, and a lot of people don't agree with me, but I think Luis Saez is absolutely a pilot. Is one of the strongest riders in the country. I got him in that top, elite echelon. I don't think he makes many mistakes. I think he puts every horse in the right spot to win. And if they got it, they're going to win. And if they don't got it, he gets them to win sometimes anyway. I mean, he is, to me, the epitome of a guy who you said moves a horse up. I mean, go ahead, take over.
Absolutely. And I want to go back to the comment before quickly on Irad Ortiz. And I think, so I was a competitive All-American athlete before I got into horse training. And for those who are not athletes, and for those who, you might have been an athlete in high school, but you didn't get to the higher levels. Okay. And we see criticism about this stuff all the time because there's this woke generation about kindness, and kindness is fine. Being kind and polite is fine. But when you're an athlete, you have a killer instinct. That is part of you. That is competitiveness. And so when you think of these top riders, and yes, does Irad Ortiz maybe push the envelope? Sure. But so do Formula One drivers. And people will say, well, these aren't cars, they're horses. Well, none of these riders would ever purposefully put a horse in a position to injure itself. Okay. So I know that for a fact because A, it puts their life in harm's way, but you can't be soft as a top jockey. And you have to have almost a fighter pilot mentality where you take advantage of every opportunity that presents itself and exploit the mistakes of your competitors. And so that is what it is to be a jockey and to be a professional athlete. So you have to think about that when you go into this. Reckless is where you're using your horse to beat up on another horse, and you could injure the other horse because they could clip your heels and other things like that. But I just want to get that out of the way before we get to Luis Saez. And yes, I would agree 100% with you, John. I remember when Luis came to New York, and Richard DePass came to my barn. And Richard said, I've got this jockey named Luis Saez. I'd like to ride, we'd like to ride some horses. And I was at Aqueduct, and I said, sure, I'd love to put him on some horses. What I noticed, and I noticed it with Irad and Jose, Irad and Jose had a phenomenal level of horsemanship. These guys are, you could have them do rodeo. I think you could have Jose and Irad do anything on a horse, period, and they'd be phenomenal. Okay, they're just phenomenal horsemen. I think what separates Luis and actually might put him in the category of being one of the top riders or the top in the country is Luis has a better feel for a horse than anybody else. And so I put Luis on horses, and I put him on a filly called Margaret Ray. And Margaret was an extremely temperamental, difficult filly who I pretty much had to audition jockeys for to see who she'd get along with. Now, Margaret Ray was by Pioneer the Nile, Empire Maker Toussaint. Toussaint in the judgement pedigree, Toussaint was a very difficult mare to handle. Okay?
I remember her. I know.
Extremely difficult. And so from what I've been told, Bobby Frankel used to have to breeze her out of the gate on the inside with another horse on the outside to get her to breeze because she was liable to take a U-turn and just go back to the barn. And there would be days where he'd scratch her because she just didn't seem like she wanted to run that day, and he'd just scratch her. This filly was the same. Okay. So I was sent this filly by Zayat Stables, and they said, Mike.
He wasn't as good as Toussaint.
No. So this filly was sent to me by Zayat Stables, and I was told by the farm and by everybody sending me this horse, this filly can't run. And so she comes into the barn. She's this little filly. She's barely 15 hands. And I remember the first day, I hear my wonderful fiance, Dominique, screaming from down the shed row, Mike. So I come down, and this filly's trying to lay down on Dominique in the stall while Dominique's trying to pick her feet and inspect her. So Margaret was wicked smart and very, very good at picking up on how to screw with somebody if she could. So if you didn't have enough confidence around her, she'd pick on you a little bit. The filly would. So Margaret and I got along swimmingly. I did very well. I was very in tune with fillies. I excelled with fillies. Probably I could train colts, but I loved the girls because they were fun to train.
Right.
Margaret, I put one exercise rider on. She hit the brakes, didn't want to gallop. Put another exercise rider on. She'd screw with him. Put another rider on. Loved it. Trained. But Margaret was a filly that every single day I'd have to decide how she feels. Okay, is Margaret happy today? Is she pissed off? Is she angry? If she was angry, she'd go out and jog 2 miles. If she was happy, she'd go gallop. If she was feeling great, we'd breeze her. Like literally, it was trained by Braille by the day on her. I put Luis on her. I saw the filly take a deep breath, let everything out, canter around there, no problem, gallop around there, breeze for him. Everything was perfect. She loved him. So I think I put him on her at Saratoga, and that was my error. I put him on her because she breezed out of the gate in like 22 and change for a quarter mile. So I thought Pioneer of the Nile. I'd worked with the father at Baffert's. I said, oh, she's a dirt filly. I remember walking to the paddock that day, and I told Dominique, I said, I got a gut feeling that this filly is actually a grass filly. And she says, right now? Like you're walking her to the paddock right now? You're like second choice. You told Zayat this thing could run. I said, well, yeah. So she gets beat 32 lengths that day. Anyways, so I take her back, work her on the grass a couple of times. I realized I was right. She's a turf filly. Put Luis on. She finishes second in a maiden special weight at Belmont to a filly of Chad Brown's that went on to win a stake. So Justin Zayat says, why don't we run her in the Miss Grillo? I said, she's a maiden, but sure, I have no problem running her in the Miss Grillo. Again, get her ready. I'm 50-1. Okay. She turns for home. Looks like she's going to win. Looks like she's pulling clear. Luis is on her that day. Horse pulls outside, flies right past me, wins. We get beat 3 lengths. That was Lady Eli. Okay. So my filly was still a maiden. So we got beat by Lady Eli. We ran second in the Miss Grillo in her 3rd career start. Luis's younger brother, who Luis had actually told me was a better rider than he was, unfortunately had passed away. Okay. And Luis had to go to the funeral. So we couldn't get him to ride her. I think we decided Zayat wanted me to guarantee 1st, 2nd, or 3rd for the Breeders' Cup. And I said, I can't guarantee that. We're 5th best on paper. So we didn't go. We stayed in New York. So I put Lascano on her. She hated Jose. I remember when I legged her up, her ears pinned. She went out. She ran 3rd that day in the, I forget which race it was, but just did not like Jose Lascano. Loved Luis. And this is what I'll tell you. When you watch Luis ride a horse, and we saw it with Casa Creed the other day, there is no difference between rider on the back and horse on the ground. It's poetry in motion. It's perfect symmetry. Everything is timed beautifully. He's very much in sync with his horses. And I think that's why he gets the most out of them. I think he's one of the few riders nowadays that really feels a horse, understands a horse, and can get in the head of the horse and work as one unit versus a rider riding a horse. And that's why, to me, I think he's one of the most elite riders in the country.
We're on the same page. We got 3 guys left.
Okay.
Let's start with the Frenchman, Florent Geroux.
Yeah, I think Florent's a very good rider. I think you said it too. You saw him come over and he reminded you, just as you said with Prat, that he was going to be somebody big. I think, and I've noticed it, I think he stays out of a horse's way really well and helps him get comfortable in a race. I think that's something that people might not see. I watch how horses break underneath him, and he doesn't really snatch them up. He just kind of lets them come out. It really kind of lets the horse find themselves and then settles them down. And then he's able to finish on a horse as well. So he basically allows the horse to get comfortable, find their confidence, find what they want to do on the race, and then also knows how to come down the lane and finish on them. So I think those compared for me puts him in a pilot's list because it's tough. It's the same thing for a trainer. A jockey can mess up a race and a trainer can mess up a horse by getting in a horse's way. When you have the ability to remove your ego of what you want to do and help the horse relax to figure out what they need to do to be the best that they can, and then help them accentuate that ability, you have a recipe for being very good. So to me, I think he's a pilot.
You know, of all the riders that we're doing today, and when we do this in the future, we're going to do it as kind of like a part of other shows. So we don't, you know, do that many riders. We'll do a couple here or there, a couple here or there, a couple here or there on other shows. But, you know, this show was basically the introduction to the pilots and passengers that we're gonna chronicle as time goes on. Of the ones we did today, which is our biggest list, I had the most difficult time categorizing Florent Geroux. And I wrote about him, like I said, most improved rider in the country a couple of years back before he won that Breeders' Cup on Work All Week. And I hope I'm not discrediting the horse by saying his name wrong. But I think he took a step back. I think he gets a lot of really good mounts. I don't think he puts them all in the perfect spot or the best spot to win. I think he makes some errors. I think getting a lot of those really good mounts has made him get a little overconfident. I think after Gun Runner, he tailed off a little bit from being as solid and as good as he was. I think in my book, and I said I'm going to go hard, you know what I mean, because it's just how I was going to play this show. So if I was being liberal, I would have put him on the pilot list, but I'm not. I'm being conservative, and I'm going to put him on the passenger list, and I'm going to say that he's in that danger zone of being somebody that, according to me, stays on that passenger list. He needs to get back to the Florent, in my book, that he can be and was 2-3 years ago. And I think if he doesn't do that soon, then he's just never going to do it. So I think he's a very good rider. I think right now he's at a point in his career where he's a little overrated. I think that's not at this point permanent, but it's, to me, the danger zone of becoming permanent. I think he's got to get back to where he was. I think he's got the ability to do that, but you know, I think he's tailed off. I think you know, he rode a horse for Brad Cox the other day. I think it was the horse he rode in the Derby, Cyberknife, in the Matt win, and he wound up winning the race, getting the bob at like 1-9. But you know, turning for home, he looked like a 1-9 shot. You know what I mean? He was stalking another horse. He was looking back, making sure there was no competition. There wasn't any, and he just went to set down his horse. And you know what? The other horse fooled him. The other rider said, you know what? I'm going to set down my horse too, and let's go. You know what I mean? And, you know, he got a little, you know, like panicky for a second, like he thought he was going to win. And, you know, he got down and, you know, was hustling and pushing and pumping. But, you know, I like a rider when you're on a 1-9 shot for Brad Cox and you're stalking another horse right off him and you look back behind you and you go, you're supposed to put that horse away. You know, when that horse has got more than you anticipate, then you're not as on your game, you know, and anybody can get fooled. And if it was only this one time, I wouldn't be bringing it up, but it's something that I've seen happen too much with the kind of horses he's riding, where, you know, he goes to set him down and all of a sudden he's in a dogfight that he wasn't expecting. So I like him. I don't mind betting on him. I would ride him if I was an owner. But he's right now he's a passenger, and he needs to step it back up if he wants to get on my pilot list. He probably doesn't care, but
yeah, I would agree with you in that he's regressed. I think he's been lucky to have a lot of very good horses over the last couple of years, and you know, when you do that, it can either make you complacent and you stop working on your game. And that's kind of why I have such a big amount of respect for the Ortiz brothers, because those guys work day in, day out. They put in the work to stay on top. They don't get complacent. And so, yeah, I would say he does look like he's regressed a little bit, and maybe he was so used to getting, these live Brad Cox mounts and all these top horses that you don't have to work for it. And
It's a great barometer for that. Okay, especially with Kentucky riders and New York riders, the guys that are borderline, Saratoga.
yeah,
Because Saratoga, everybody gets pumped up and wants to win, and everybody's competitive. And that's where the $25,000 claimer on a Wednesday afternoon is not all that different from the big race on Saturday, because it's Saratoga and everybody's, just got their game faces on, Flo has a tough time in Saratoga. Even when he won the Whitney and the other race with Gun Runner that year, I think, what do you win? 3, 4, 5 races the whole meet, and a couple of them were on Gun Runner. Wins a lot more at Churchill, and brings a lot of that business with him over there. So, and now he doesn't even go to Saratoga anymore.
right.
So I think Saratoga is a heck of a good barometer and a good way to lead into the next guy on our list, who does very well in Kentucky. Young rider, does very well in Kentucky, also at Gulfstream, and goes to Saratoga and holds his own there. And that's Tyler Gaffalione. You want me to go first on Tyler?
Go for it.
I call Tyler a pilot. I think he is on the rapid improving path. I think he's already really, really good. And he's one of those riders that I love watching at this point in their career, because I think he gets better week to week as he rides more and more and competes more and more. He's already a Preakness winner. He's just really, really solid, really good. A couple of years ago, I would have said, he's got a lot of potential. He's really good, but he makes a lot of mistakes. He doesn't do that anymore. He's gotten better. He makes very few mistakes now. Strong finisher, fearless, like you said, most of these guys have to be. And I've got him a pilot and probably one of the most improving riders in the country, and just getting better, day to day, week to week. And I think he proves that by that Saratoga barometer, because last couple of years he goes there, and the same way like he rides Gulfstream, the same way like he rides Churchill, has a lot of success and wins races.
Yeah, I agree with Tyler. I think, looking at all these guys and looking at how they finish a race, I think he's one of the strongest finishers in the U.S. on a horse. I think he really, really drives a horse across the wire and has a phenomenal finish. I think he's very good at reading riders and horses in front of him and understanding where he is in a race and what he has underneath him, and making sure to make his move at the right time, and then just powering a horse down through the finish. I agree. To me, he's a pilot. I think, and it's interesting because we're talking about the 20 riders in the Derby, and usually those are the top 20 in the country, right? And so you're trying to think of who's top 5, who's top 10. To me, he's in the list of 8 through 6. He's in there. He's not in the top 5 yet, but he's working his way there, and I think he has the potential, as long as he continues to work and continue to improve, that he could crack the top 5.
I agree. I think he does that, have that kind of potential. We got one guy left, and I will say this. I think this shaked out to be a little bit more interesting than we thought as far as passengers and pilots, because when we did it, when we talked about it, we thought, well, to 20 Derby riders, we're going to have 90% pilots, and I don't think, I didn't keep a tally, but I don't think it worked out exactly that way. Last, not least, Joe Bravo.
Joe Bravo, I think, is a very interesting rider. And, I actually just texted my father and said, look, you need to get him on your horse. Joe Bravo is, even in his age now, is a hungry, aggressive rider. And I think he's got a very good hand ride finish. And I do think he moves up horses in certain situations. But for me, he's a guy, and you see it with some of these guys. And we said it, Johnny went through a period, but he came back, right? Mike's maybe a little bit complacent now, but he's a big money rider on the right days. Joe, I don't think is complacent, and maybe he's just got that competitiveness of like an Irad or Ortiz, where he's going to go out there and try and show you every single time that he can still ride. But from what I see with him, is he's very smart. He's patient. He's aggressive when he needs to be, and he's not afraid to fight for every inch that he gets. I think he's great at timing a finish, and he fights to the wire. So for me, when I'm talking trainer, right, I think he's very good for a horse that falls asleep on you, and a lazy horse that needs to be shook up a little bit to keep his mind on business. And I think those are the types of horses that Joe probably really could move up. Some of these guys, we were talking about certain guys like Joel riding a horse on a loose rein and letting the horse relax. You put a type of horse that I'm talking about that I want to give to Joe to Joel, it's not going to fire the same way. Whereas if I get a horse like that to Joe, who's going to shake him up, stay after him, make sure he finishes, I think he moves those types of horses up. Does he move every horse up? No, but I think he moves up a specific type. So for me, he's in that category, but I do think I'd lean more towards pilot.
Really interesting. Okay. I agree. And again, you got to realize we're talking about Joe Bravo, Johnny V, Mike Smith, these veteran guys today. Okay. So today, my opinion is Passenger. And yet I agree with everything you said. I think that he's very smart. He's very competitive. He brings a lot of experience to the table. He knows what to do. He knows what not to do. He's a good judge of what's going on under him and a good judge of what's going on around him. But I just think that, and time is undefeated. Okay, they ain't never lost. I just think that at this point, and I can relate because I'm getting old myself. So I don't mean this in a bad. I think the talent to be called a pilot is just not quite there anymore. Mentally, yeah. Intangibles, everything, but the talent to just get down and do the physicality of what it takes to be a pilot. Okay. I just don't think he's got it anymore, and I don't think he's at the level of a Mike Smith who can compensate. And Mike is just in incredible, physical shape. And Johnny obviously is too. And Joe probably is too. You got to be a rider. But I just think that at this point, the talent aspect has caught up with him, as it will with everybody. Like I said, it's undefeated. So, nothing against Joe, but and he compensates for a lot of it with his experience and his savvy knowledge and whatnot. But like I said, I'm going hard and I'm going conservative. You know what I mean? I ain't giving no free passes. I'm going to call him at this point because of that physicality aspect of Passenger. Sorry, Joe, I really like it, but
yeah,
just my opinion anyway.
Well, and I'll second.
And I would call myself at this point a Passenger because listen, I'm 60. I can't do what I used to do. You know what I mean? I want to. You know what I mean? I get in the ring boxing. I know I want to knock you out. Doesn't mean I can. You know what I mean? I know what to do to knock you out. Doesn't mean I can.
Yeah.
I'll get some good shots in, and if I catch you right, maybe I'll get you. But 10 years ago, I would have told you, you're going, don't even worry about it, man. I'm gonna knock you out. No question.
Yeah.
Just a matter of when. I'm going to catch you and you're going to go. I can't say that now. I would love to, but I can't.
Right.
So it is.
So I would, and I'll say something interesting. So somebody asked me last year about Joe Bravo coming to California. And they said, gosh, Joe, they made this big headline about it. And I know his agent, I know Matt Nakatani, right. Corey's son. And, he was trying to promote Joe and everybody was trying to promote Joe. And it was this big, exciting thing to get this big name rider out to California, Joe Bravo. And somebody said, well, what do you think about Joe? You train on the East Coast. I said, Joe's dodging Saratoga. I said, that's why he's coming to California. I said, because Saratoga is the barometer, as you've said. And Joe, I don't think will do well because he doesn't want to ride at Monmouth because he doesn't want to have to deal with this no whips, right? So he doesn't want to go to Saratoga. So he'd rather come to California. And so hearing that and saying, he's dodging Saratoga because he can't be at home at Monmouth. To come to California, we had really in California, and this is the one time where I will not take my hat off to California. We had Prat, and we had Prat dominate. And we have Rispoli, and Rispoli's very good. Rispoli came to Kentucky, and he struggled at the Keeneland meet a little bit. You have JJ Hernandez, very good rider. You've got Mike when he decides to be Mike. And then there's a long list of who do I want to put on the horse, right? You know, there's only 3 guys that you really want to ride if you could get them. And so for me, because this horse is based in California, I said, well, Joe's number 4 on the list. So if you get Joe, get Joe. But, you know, it's not the toughest riding colony. He's doing great out there. But yes, I could agree with you on the national scale. He probably more deserves to be on the passenger list.
Yeah, you know, like I said, I was going to take the conservative route on this show because I thought it was going to be a little lopsided because we were doing the Derby guys, you know. So I just went that route, but that's how I see it. We were in agreement on most of the guys.
Well, and if we're in disagreement, it's, you know, it's all up to opinion, right? Some people think LeBron's better than Jordan, and I will tell you unequivocally, Michael Jordan was much better than LeBron James. There's no argument on that fact.
I agree. I agree with that. But you see, you can't go by me. I'm an old guy because, like, I'll throw names out there that you'll say are not even in that league. But like, I used to love to watch Julius Erving play.
Oh, Dr. J is great.
I saw him do things with a basketball that Jordan and LeBron couldn't do. You know, so you know, you could argue that, oh well, he wasn't as good as them, and I'd be like, okay, you know what I mean? You know, if you could take Dr. J in his prime and Michael Jordan in his prime, okay, if we could somehow make that happen, okay, through technology, through time travel, and put them both, they never saw each other on the court, right? Okay, both of them in their prime and put them on a court, half court, one-on-one, okay? I'm a gambling man by nature, professional gambler, all right? And you said, we're going to bet on who wins. I'm all in on Dr. J.
I think
One-on-one against Michael Jordan. I'm all in on Dr. J. I bet everything I got.
Yeah, I think you have something there because I could see how Dr. J's length would lend to his benefit in a one-on-one half-court scenario, because Mike would either try and take him to the rack and Dr. J could jump. He didn't just have length, he could jump.
He could jump like a gazelle.
Yeah, and so I mean,
I think he could stand, and I've seen you do it, so you know what it takes. I think he could standing jump over Michael Jordan.
Maybe, yeah.
I mean, 6 what?
6'6".
Right. I think he could standing jump over him.
So, I mean, it's interesting because you saw Magic play Dr. J, and Magic got the better of him in that series, but I don't think Dr. J was in his prime then. So I think that'd be really interesting. I saw a documentary, we'll end it with this, because otherwise we could go on for basketball probably forever. But they showed Dr. J playing at Rucker Park, and this was on YouTube. And they said, you know, every year there'd be guys from the NBA show up at Rucker Park, and they'd want to play. And everybody said, wait until you see Julius. And one guy said, who the hell is Julius? And they're like, we're in the NBA. Who the hell's this Julius kid? And they said, Julius walked on the court at age 16. And before Rucker Park had a couple spectators. And by the end of the summer, they were sitting all around the chain link fence, in the apartments, on the bridge, just trying to get a view of Dr. J in his teenage years playing at Rucker Park against NBA players. So, yeah. Incredible.
Those are still well, I don't know today, but not long ago, those are still some of the toughest games you'll see anywhere.
Yeah. I'm hoping to get a warm-up game before the trainer jockey game this summer. I've been practicing. I want to play a couple pickup games at Rucker Park, and then Irad Ortiz, I know you're competitive, so if you're watching this, the jockeys are finally losing again this summer, and we're ready for you.
All right, sounds good. Well, always fun. We're going to pick this up again on different shows. We'll have a little, 5-10 minute pilot and passenger thing. If you watch and you want our opinion on a rider, shoot either of us a message, and we'll cover it. We got a lot of, you know, good shows planned for the future. A lot of things happening on our Unfiltered show, on our other Past the Wire shows, on the website, all over the place. So I guess that's a wrap. Ciao for now.
All right, see ya.
All right.
Fighting back, coming down to the finish. If a picture is worth 1,000 words, this is one stunning picture. Lanerie leads, pulled up now, second on the outside. They're coming down the line. 1,000 words has done it.
Nobody does it better.